Hello everybody, and welcome back to another market analysis for the month of November. Now there's been a lot happening in the RuneScape economy this month. We have stuff like the League's Trailblazer, which has had a big effect on the economy. Old school RuneScape bonds are now at the highest price they've ever been in the history of the game. However, on the flip side to that, in general, most of the economy is under a huge amount of downward pressure, which is crashing most other markets. So today we're going to talk mainly about those topics, but really anything else I thought was interesting in the RuneScape economy this month. As always guys, if you enjoy these types of videos, I always appreciate it if you leave the video a like. It really helps my video get recommended to other people who maybe haven't seen me before. Alright guys, let's get started. Now pretty much one of the most common questions I get around this time of year especially is, why the hell are bonds so expensive and when are they going to get cheaper? Now if any of you have tried to buy a bond recently, you might have noticed that they are at an all-time high. I went and bought one a couple days ago and I bought it for just over 7 million GP, which is getting kind of prohibitively expensive in my opinion. So once again, bonds are at an all-time high. Now that's not an uncommon thing, as bonds have been slowly increasing in price every year, up and down of course, but in general they've always been rising. And in my opinion, most likely they're always going to be doing that. Bonds are extremely unique when you compare it to any other RuneScape item, as the value of the bond is tied to a real-life currency, unlike every other item in the game, which is stuck in a closed system, which is the OSRS economy. Now if you just look at the last 6 months of the bonds, you'll notice that they've pretty well doubled in price. Doesn't look really good, but let's go back further here and have a look at the pricing history over the last 5 years. Now like I said, every year they're going up and down quite a bit, usually following a seasonal pattern. For example, January to March generally is when they are the cheapest, and October to December is when they're the most expensive. So first year they peaked at around 2.8 mil, crashed back down. Second year peaking at around 3.2 mil, crashed right back down again. 2017 they went up to around 3.5 mil, again crashed right back down. Now unlike any other year, this was a bit of an anomaly because this is when mobile came out and bonds became very popular again. In 2019 they went pretty much from 3 mil, doubling all the way up to 6 mil, crashing right back down again. And finally in 2020 they've gone from around 3.5 mil, looks like they're going to peak probably around 7.5 mil. The good news is within the next couple of weeks or maybe a month, bonds are going to become less expensive. Now the reason that the price of bonds fluctuate seasonally really just has to do with real life events. We have stuff like winter break, summer break, Premier Club promotions, stuff like that. I'm not sure if you've ever noticed, but bond prices even fluctuate weekly, generally on the same day, which is often Wednesday for whatever reason. Now unfortunately the bad news here is that bond prices are most likely going to continue to be more expensive year after year, and there's not much that we as a player personally can do about it. Now because the price of bonds is tied to another currency beyond just GP, if the price of GP gets more and more inflated, as in moneymakers are just generally better, more alcohols are being pumped into the game, more gold farmers, stuff like that, there will just be a lot more gold in the game versus 2015 for example. Now of course, because there is a lot more GP in the game now than there was even 5 years ago, the price of bonds will just naturally increase with it. And the final reason why I think bonds have increased a lot, especially in the last month or two, is to do with the Trailblazer League. I know a lot of players are buying bonds just to play Trailblazer, either they want to come back to play RuneScape, but as they're only going to be playing it for a couple weeks, it doesn't really make sense to purchase membership, so they just go ahead and buy a bond. Or established players who just want to play on 2 accounts at once, play on their main as well as Trailblazer, or thirdly, there are players who want to play on 2 Trailblazer accounts at once. Either way, it definitely stimulates the economy for bonds, and a lot more players are buying them. So those 3 factors together have made the perfect storm and the most expensive bond in OSRS history. Now the RuneScape economy has been in a bit of a slump for, well, half the year now. One of the longer economic downturns in old school RuneScape. Pretty much all markets have been affected. PVM items definitely have been affected. They have been decreasing rapidly for the last 6 months, and most resource items have been affected almost as badly. Now of course the Trailblazer League didn't help either. A ton of players went ahead and sold off a lot of their items just around October 28th. The first reason being that a lot of players wanted some extra gold to either buy bonds or just to protect their assets. The assumption is that a lot of people would sell off items when Trailblazer League started, so even if you didn't want to do that normally, I think a lot of players dumped their items just to hold cash, as they assumed that that's what everyone else would do and that's how the market would react. And of course we got a big market crash, which I talked about 2 weeks ago. Well, now that Trailblazer is well underway, I guess we're almost at the halfway mark now. A lot of players are starting to come back to the main game, which has started to recover the price a bit. Now, it's hard to say how much the price is going to recover because the Trailblazer update was just a small hiccup on an otherwise pretty steady downturn on most markets. With that said though, quite a few items are finally starting to rise back up in price. For example, here we have the Dragon Warhammer. This week jumping up around 3 mil in value just in the last couple of days. A kind of similar story for the Ancestral Robe Top. 2 days ago it jumped up from around 62 mil all the way up to 65 mil, which is a 3 mil jump just in a day and a half, which is quite quick. A pretty similar story for the Ancestral Robe Bottom as well, jumping up around 3 mil. Even more expensive items like this item Viter has at least recovered the Trailblazer effect. Whether it continues upwards is kind of hard to say, but we know this week it jumped up a lot, going from 710 mil back on November 19th, all the way up to 750 mil just 2 days later. The Twisted Bow is doing something similar, going from around 1 bill 70 up to 1.1 bill, which is a 30 mil increase just in a day or two. Now presumably a lot of players are coming back from leagues and they decided, hey, I want my T-Bow back, or hey, I want my Scythe back, or hey, I want my Dragon Warhammer back. These items are still in demand, they're required for PVM, so I think there's been a bit of a spike in demand over the last couple of days, and I would expect that to continue, as while the player retention for Trailblazer League has been much better than the previous one, it's just inevitable that players are eventually going to quit, finish off all their goals, and come back to the main game. Or maybe they'll just be way too depressed with regular experience rates and they won't play either, I don't know. Now this price increase is not the case for every item, but it is looking fairly promising for the majority of items. Now one thing I find really fascinating are the twisted items from the last league. For whatever reason, when Trailblazer was released, they started to increase in price really quickly, jumping up from around 19 mil up to 25 mil. Now that doesn't really make much sense to me, as it's fairly evident that more twisted items could come into the game because there is of course the new league, which allows you to get more points, which allows you to buy more rewards. Some of those could be twisted horns or twisted blueprints. Very strange, but it did crash pretty much immediately back down, and for whatever reason the twisted blueprint is actually continuing to rise. It's very strange. Like, I presume quite a few players are probably going to buy the twisted blueprint as it's so expensive, and the point conversion between Trailblazer League and the Twisted League are 1-to-1, and most people argue that points are much easier to obtain in this league. So I would expect that to go down eventually, but who knows? It seems pretty random to me. Alright, and finally here, let's have a look at some resource items. Now resource items have been affected by the Trailblazer League, but a little bit more indirectly. For example, if you look at Blue Dragonite here, when Trailblazer League started, it crashed from around 1700 down to 1600, which is about 10%. Now why exactly did that happen? Well, in my opinion, it has to do with the demographic that is playing Trailblazer League versus that of the main game. There are very few bots or gold farmers that went to go play Trailblazers because of course it is a temporary game mode. There's no point investing any time in there if your only purpose is money. So because of that, we still have the same amount of gold farmers and bots in the main game. However, a large part of the player base is now playing leagues, which means the ratio between bots, gold farmers, etc., and legitimate players is much worse, which means there is a similar amount of bots and gold farmers dumping resources into the economy, but way fewer players actually buying them because they're all playing Trailblazer. Now that effect has caused many resource items to decrease in price. However, just over the last couple of weeks, many of them are rising back up, in my opinion, as more players come back. For example, we have Blue Dragonite, but we also have a Green Dragonite. At the beginning of November, it was worth around 1300, now it is worth 1500, so a big resurgence there. IU logs are starting to come back up in price as well, going from around 280, for example, back up to 330. A pretty similar story for magic logs, going from around 1000 up to, well, 1050, not a huge difference there. Now that is not the case for all items. For example, the Pharaoh Scepter, not looking super hot on that one. At the beginning of the month, the Pharaoh Scepter was around 3.3 mil, and now it is around 2 mil. A massive drop off. Now part of that has to do with the Twitch Prime promotion, but a bigger factor is that there are just not that many uses for Pharaoh Scepters. So I would imagine they might stabilize or increase a bit as more players come back, but who knows? There's just as good a chance that they just continue downwards. Anyway guys, that is going to be it for today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed it and found it useful. As always, if you have anything you want to discuss, let me know with a comment down below. I do read them all at the very least, so I really appreciate it. Now before I go here, I want to give a massive thank you to one of my newest subscribers, James Luft, who just subscribed at the Dragon tier of YouTube membership, joining Brad Sings, Tizdoc Bunny, Revolver Ocelot, and Kush Patel, all at the Dragon tier. That's amazing, guys. Thank you so much. And also a huge shout out to Luke Kayser, Base Titch, Heathen, OSRS, and Double Talk for your continued support. If you guys are looking for an additional way to support the channel, becoming a YouTube member is an awesome way to do so. You can become immortalized in some of my videos, get access to my video release schedule, as well as get a custom role in my Discord channel. Thanks again, guys, and I'll see you next time.